After my husband's funeral, I didn't tell my son about the second house he left me. Glad I kept quiet. Before we get into the story, tell us in the comment section where you are watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave your honest review. I remember the rain that day more than anything else. It wasn't just falling, it was pouring, drumming against the church roof like it was trying to remind me of every moment I'd ever shared with David. My husband, my partner for 38 years, my reason for getting out of bed on the worst days. And now, he was gone. I wish I could tell you I was one of those strong, composed widows, head held high, stoic in my grief. But truth be told, I felt hollow. Like someone had scooped out the inside of me and left only skin and bone behind. The night before he passed, David had grabbed my hand so tight I almost winced and whispered something strange. "Don't let Daniel take everything. Remember the papers in the study." At the time, I thought it was the fever talking, the medication. I nodded, kissed his forehead, and told him to rest. I didn't press for details. Now I wish I had. The funeral was supposed to start at 2. At 2:15, the doors creaked open, and in walked my son, Daniel. He was late. Daniel, my only child, looked like he'd stepped straight out of a business magazine cover. Expensive tailored suit, gleaming watch, the kind of confidence that fills a room whether you want it to or not. And right behind him, his wife Lydia, clinging to his arm like she might blow away without him. They came down the aisle quickly, offering quick nods to people they barely knew. When they finally reached me, Daniel bent down, kissed my cheek and said, "Sorry, traffic was awful." Traffic. His father's funeral, and all he could talk about was traffic. Lydia's hug was perfunctory, 3 seconds maybe. She had on too much perfume, the kind that clings to your clothes and follows you home. The service went on, the pastor's voice a steady hum that I barely heard. My mind wandered. Flashes of David laughing, fixing the fence, burning the toast on Sunday mornings. The sound of his boots on the porch. The way his eyes softened when he looked at me. Afterward, we moved to the reception hall, where people murmured and shuffled, offering plates of food I couldn't imagine eating. That's when Daniel cornered me. "Mom," he began, his tone low but firm, "I think it's best we put the house on the market immediately. It's too big for you now." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a directive. Like I was some incompetent woman who needed decisions made for her. I forced a thin smile. "Daniel, your father hasn't even been buried for a full day. Let's not talk about that now." He frowned, as if I'd inconvenienced him. "I'm just trying to help you, Mom." I wanted to say, "No, you're trying to help yourself." But I swallowed it. A few days later, we gathered in the lawyer's office for the reading of the will. I sat at one end of the polished table, Daniel and Lydia across from me. The lawyer, an older man with thin glasses, cleared his throat and began. David had left the main house entirely to me, along with a modest joint savings account. Daniel was given a separate sum of cash, enough to pay off his debts if he was smart with it, though I doubted he would be. There was no mention of the second property, the beach house. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Daniel's jaw tighten. Lydia leaned in, whispering something to him. I couldn't hear her words, but I didn't need to. I knew that look in her eyes, calculating, dissatisfied. My heart twisted. Should I have told them about the beach house? The one David bought years ago after Daniel blew through his college trust fund? That house had been David's dream. A quiet escape by the shore where we'd planned to spend our old age together. No, not yet. My gut told me David's warning meant something. I told myself it was too soon. That evening, I sat alone in the living room, the rain tapping against the window again like it had at the funeral. I sipped my tea, trying to lose myself in the sound. The house felt too quiet, too still. That's when I heard it. Voices. Muffled, coming from the hallway near the guest room where Daniel was staying for the night. I set my cup down and moved closer, careful not to make the floorboards creak. It was Daniel, his voice low, urgent. "Don't worry," he was saying. "I'll get her to sign something. She doesn't even know what she has." My stomach dropped. Lydia's voice came next, faint but sharp. I couldn't catch every word, but the tone was unmistakable, pushy, impatient. They were talking about me. I stood there in the dark, the weight of David's last words pressing on me like a stone. Don't let Daniel take everything. For the first time since David's death, my grief was joined by something else, something hotter, sharper. Suspicion. I crept back to my room, my mind racing. If Daniel already knew or suspected that I was hiding something, how much longer before he started looking for it? And then a chilling thought struck me. Maybe he already had. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering how much of my son I really knew anymore, and how far he'd go to get what he thought was his. The next morning before the sun rose, I found myself standing outside David's study door. His words echoed in my head. "Remember the papers in the study." I took a deep breath, turned the knob, and stepped inside, and that's when I saw it. Something that told me my son wasn't just being greedy, he was planning something. But what I found in that study, that was the moment I realized my husband hadn't just left me a house. He'd left me a secret and a warning. And Daniel was already trying to take it from me. After that night, the night I overheard Daniel telling Lydia he'd get me to sign something, I stopped looking at my son the same way. I'd like to tell you I confronted him right then and there, demanded an explanation, maybe even threw him out. But you don't just shut the door on your child, even when you suspect they're plotting against you. No, instead, I waited. Watched. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became a regular presence in my home. He'd show up unannounced, grocery bags in hand, smiling that smile he'd perfected since he was a boy, warm enough to melt strangers, but just a little too polished for someone who truly cared. "Thought I'd save you a trip to the store, Mom," he'd say, setting the bags down. We'd make tea, sit in the kitchen, and it would always start the same, light chatter about the weather, about the neighbor's new dog, about my health. But sooner or later, the conversation would turn. "You know, Mom," he'd say casually, "houses this size, they're a lot to maintain for one person. You could sell this, get a nice condo, maybe even have a little cash left over to enjoy life." Enjoy life. That was his way of saying, give me what I want without making me look like the bad guy. One Sunday, he brought Lydia. I made roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and the apple pie David used to love. Lydia praised my cooking, but the compliments felt thin, like air bubbles in bread dough. Halfway through the meal, she leaned forward, her voice all sweet concern. "You must get lonely here, Margaret. This house must feel empty." I smiled politely. "I manage just fine." She tilted her head, like a therapist trying to coax a confession. "You know, if you sold both properties," she stopped herself, as if catching a slip. "Well, everything. You'd have so much freedom to travel, see the world. Isn't that what people your age dream about?" My fork paused in midair. Both properties. How did she know there were two? That night, I couldn't sleep. David's voice echoed in my mind again. "Remember the papers in the study?" I went to the study and turned on the lamp. The air smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at his desk. Finally, I sat down and began pulling at the drawers, one by one. Receipts, utility bills, tax forms, but nothing that felt like a secret, until I found the false bottom in the last drawer. It was thin, barely a sliver of wood, but when I lifted it, there it was. A manila folder, neatly labeled. Cedar Point. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were the property deeds, a set of old-fashioned brass keys, and an envelope with my name written in David's familiar, steady handwriting. I unfolded the letter, and the moment I saw his words, I felt him in the room with me. "Margaret, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. This house in Cedar Point is yours. Yours alone. I bought it after Daniel spent through his college trust fund in 2 years. I needed to know you would have something safe from his recklessness. Please, don't tell him about it unless you have no other choice. I know this might sound harsh, but it's to protect you. This place, it's my gift to you, your safe harbor." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. And just like that, I was back there. It was 15 years ago. David and I had driven out to Cedar Point for the first time. The air smelled like salt and pine. The waves curled in, gentle but strong. The house was small but perfect, white siding, blue shutters, and a porch that overlooked the ocean. David wrapped his arm around me and said, "Someday when it's just you and me, we'll come here. No phones, no worries, just us." I laughed and told him I could never live somewhere so quiet. He grinned and said, "You'll change your mind." That night, we sat on the porch, watching the sun drop into the water. He took my hand and said something I'll never forget. "If anything happens to me, this is yours. Don't tell anyone unless you must." I came back to the present. clutching the letter. Daniel couldn't have this. Not now, not ever. I decided to hide the deed somewhere else, somewhere only I would think to look. The manila folder stayed in the false bottom drawer as a decoy, but the real paperwork went into an old sewing box in my closet, tucked beneath a pile of fabric scraps no one had touched in years. 2 days later, I came home from running errands to find something strange. The study door was open. I always kept it shut. Always. When I stepped inside, my heart lurched. The drawers were open, papers scattered across the floor. Someone had been searching. The Cedar Point folder was gone. But I didn't panic. The real deed was safe. Whoever took the folder only had half the story. That night, lying in bed, I felt something shift inside me. Before, I'd been a grieving widow trying to navigate her way through loss and suspicion. But now I was a woman with a secret to protect. David had trusted me to keep Cedar Point safe. And I wasn't about to let my own son, my own flesh and blood, tear that away out of greed. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. If Daniel had gone so far as to search my home, what would he do next? And worse, what if he found out the truth, that the real deed wasn't in that folder at all? I had a feeling I was about to find out. Daniel thought he'd found what he was looking for, but he had no idea the real prize was still in my hands. And I was ready to play a game he didn't even know had started. I should have known Daniel wouldn't stay quiet for long. It was a Tuesday morning and I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find him standing there, not with groceries or a polite smile this time, but with a sheet of paper in his hand. His jaw was set, his eyes hard. Without even stepping inside, he thrust the paper toward me. It was a photocopy of the Cedar Point deed. "Care to explain this, Mom?" His voice was cold, like he was interrogating a stranger. I kept my face neutral. "Where did you get that?" he smirked. "Doesn't matter. What matters is why you've been hiding it from me. Dad wanted us to share everything, and you're sitting on a second house like it's some kind of secret treasure." I forced a small laugh. "Daniel, I'm not even sure if that property is still mine. That deed could be outdated. You know how your father was with paperwork." His eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me. I know exactly what it is. And if you think you can just cut me out..." I cut him off. "Daniel, no one is cutting you out, but your father left that house to me. It's not in your name, and it's not up for discussion right now." That's when his voice rose, sharp and biting. "We'll see about that. If I have to get a lawyer, I will. You're violating Dad's wishes, and I'm not going to let you get away with it." When he finally left, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled, I stood there in the silence, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from something else. Later that week, I met my oldest friend Sarah at our usual cafe. Sarah had known David since before I married him. She could read me like a book, and the moment she saw my face, she leaned in. "What's wrong?" I told her everything, about the Cedar Point house, about David's letter, about Daniel's sudden obsession. She listened quietly, then set her coffee cup down with a decisive clink. "Margaret, you can't play defense forever. You need to move that property into a trust. If it's in your name, Daniel can still try to drag you into court. But if it's in a trust, it's untouchable. He can't lay a finger on it." It made sense, and deep down I knew it was exactly what David would have wanted me to do. The next morning I called my lawyer. We met in his office, a quiet space lined with heavy books and the faint smell of leather and paper. I told him I wanted to create a trust in my name and transfer the Cedar Point property into it immediately. He nodded. "Smart move. It will take a few days to finalize, but once it's done, no one, not even your son, can challenge it without proof of fraud. And given the circumstances, that's not something he can produce." As I signed the documents, I felt something lift from my shoulders. For the first time since David's funeral, I wasn't just reacting to Daniel's schemes. I was taking control. And I decided Daniel wouldn't know a thing about it. But of course, trouble has a way of finding you when you least expect it. A week later, I was back at the cafe, sipping my tea and enjoying a rare moment of peace, when Daniel walked in. I could tell from his face, this wasn't a friendly visit. He strode up to my table, not caring that half the cafe could hear him. "You think you're clever, don't you? Hiding things, pretending you don't know what I'm talking about. You're stealing from me, Mom." The room went quiet. People turned in their seats. I could feel every pair of eyes on us. I kept my voice calm. Daniel, lower your voice. He didn't. No, you've been lying since the funeral. Dad would be ashamed of you. And you know what? When people find out what you've done, they'll see you for what you really are. A greedy, selfish woman who doesn't care about her own family. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Lydia sitting at a nearby table, pretending to be embarrassed, her eyes cast down. But I caught the faintest trace of a smile tugging at her lips. She was enjoying this. I stood, picking up my coat. I'm not doing this here. But Daniel leaned closer, his voice dropping just enough for only me to hear. One way or another, I'm getting that house. You can either sign it over or I'll make your life hell until you do. He stormed out, and I exhaled, trying to steady my hands. That's when I noticed something. A folded piece of paper on the floor, right where he'd been standing. I picked it up, meaning to return it to him, until I saw what it was. It was a printed email draft to a real estate agent. The subject line, listing for Cedar Point property. The body of the email described the house in detail, its location, square footage, even the breathtaking ocean view. And at the bottom, a proposed listing price. He was already trying to sell it, as if he owned it. I sat back down, staring at that email. Daniel wasn't just being pushy, he was acting as though the house already belonged to him. Which meant he either had a plan, or he was desperate enough to bluff his way into a deal. Either way, he was about to discover that I wasn't as naive as he thought. For weeks, I'd been playing defense. Now, it was my turn to go on the attack. He thought he could bully me into submission, but what Daniel didn't know was that the game had already changed, and the next move? That belonged to me. I remember the first time David brought me to Cedar Point. It was early spring, the kind of day where the air tastes of salt and the sky is a soft watercolor. We had just been married a few years, and David had surprised me with this little slice of paradise, a modest cedar-shingled beach house that seemed to lean toward the ocean as if it were listening to the waves. Now, years later, I was driving down that same winding coastal road alone. David was gone. His funeral was over. The people had stopped calling, and the silence had become a companion I didn't ask for. But strangely, I was starting to appreciate. I parked in front of the house and stepped out, the wood planks creaking under my feet as if they were greeting an old friend. Inside, the faint smell of cedar and sea salt wrapped around me. This was more than just property. This was a memory, a promise, a safe harbor. And in that moment, I knew. No matter what Daniel thought, no matter what games he played, I wasn't letting this place go. It would be my sanctuary, my reminder that not everything in life could be stolen. Weeks passed quietly. I started coming to the beach house more often, drinking my morning coffee on the porch, feeling the breeze sweep away the heaviness in my chest. But peace never lasts when a vulture smells an opportunity. One afternoon, I heard the sound of a car engine crunching over the gravel driveway. I looked out the window, and there he was. Daniel. My son. Smug, perfectly pressed shirt, sunglasses perched like he thought he was walking into a magazine shoot, and trailing right behind him, Lydia with that practiced smile that never reached her eyes, and a man in a navy blazer holding a leather folder. A real estate agent. I stepped onto the porch. Daniel didn't even bother with a hello. I've decided we should sell this place together, he said, as if announcing it to his underlings. It's too much for you to manage alone. Let's cash in while the market's hot. I could see it in his face. He thought he'd already won. What he didn't know was, I had been holding the ace in this game from the very beginning. I smiled softly, leaning against the porch railing. Daniel, I said, this house isn't mine anymore. His brow furrowed, and for a moment I saw the smallest crack in his confidence. What do you mean? He asked. It belongs to a trust, I told him. I transferred the deed weeks ago. I'm just a guest here now. And as for the trust, you're not a beneficiary. The color drained from his face so fast it was almost comical. Lydia blinked, glancing between us like she'd just realized she'd been sitting at the wrong poker table all along. You can't do that. Daniel hissed, stepping closer. I'm your son. I have rights. I let the breeze carry my words. Not to this house, Daniel. Not anymore. The very next day we were sitting across from each other in a lawyer's office. The polished wood table between us felt like a battlefield. The lawyer flipped through the paperwork, cleared his throat, and said flatly, "Mrs. Bennett is correct. The property is held in a legally binding trust. Mr. Bennett," he looked at Daniel, "you have no claim, unless you can provide evidence of fraud, which I assume you cannot." Daniel's jaw tightened, his fists clenched. I could almost see the years of entitlement boiling over. Then he cracked. His voice rose, words spilling out like venom. "She's been hiding things from me since Dad's funeral. She's sitting on assets, keeping secrets." And that was the moment Lydia's expression changed. It wasn't shock. It was disgust. She stood up, her chair scraping back sharply. "You told me you were protecting your mother, that you were doing this for the family." Her voice trembled. "But all along, you were just after the money." When she walked out, she didn't even look back. Daniel didn't chase her. He just sat there, staring at the table like a gambler who had bet the house and lost everything. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The silence in that office was louder than any victory speech. Weeks later, I made a quiet move of my own. There was a small piece of land David had bought years ago, something Daniel never knew existed. I sold it. Not for millions, but enough. Enough to renovate the beach house into a beautiful rental property. Enough to ensure that I would never have to depend on anyone, especially him. Now, every weekend, I sit on that porch as the sun melts into the horizon, the waves applauding softly against the shore. Sometimes I rent the place out. Sometimes I keep it for myself. But every time I'm here, I remember the lesson this chapter of my life taught me. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's the strongest answer you can give to betrayal. And sometimes the sweetest revenge is living well enough that your enemies fade into the background, irrelevant and powerless. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever had to stand your ground, protect your peace, or walk away from someone who tried to take more than they deserved, then I hope you'll remember, you are stronger than you think. Thank you for staying with me on my journey. If you want to hear more real-life stories of resilience, betrayal, and unexpected triumphs, subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that quiet strength can be the loudest victory.